everybody. Welcome to beautiful Rochester Municipal Park. We're so happy to have all of you who are here in person, as well as everybody watching online for this Alyssa Slotkin for Congress event. It's my pleasure to introduce our volunteer, Jan Koop.
Good afternoon. My name is Jan Koop, and I'm a retired first grade teacher, longtime Republican campaign volunteer, and for the past 2 years, a proud resident of Michigan's 8th District. Today, I'd like to speak to you about why I supported Alyssa Slotkin in 2018 and again in 2020. In 2018, I was horrified by the rhetoric that had taken over our politics. It was partisan and counterproductive and downright ugly. Although I had always been active on political campaigns, I was in desperate need of inspiration. I stopped by Alyssa's campaign office on the first day it opened after reading her bio in a local newspaper. I wasn't sure what party she was in, but I was really impressed with her career record, how she had served in national security roles in both the Bush and Obama administrations. And Alyssa took time to sit down and talk with me. Even though she was running as a Democrat, and I typically vote Republican, I discovered that we agreed on many of the issues facing in our district. Although actively working on a Republican campaign at the same time, I quickly realized I was really determined to elect the smart, knowledgeable, pragmatic newcomer. I was attending both Republican and Democratic events, often both on the same day. I wore red to the Republican events and came home and changed into blue . Country over party. Today, I'm wearing blue in honor of my Democratic Congresswoman with a touch of red to remind her to keep working across the aisle. I'm proud to know and very honored to introduce our hardworking Congresswoman, Alyssa Slotkin.
Hi, everybody. Thank you to Jan. I actually didn't know, I knew most of that story, but not all of it. Not the part about on election night going to 2 different parties. That's pretty amazing. And I'm extremely proud to have Jan's support because in Michigan, we were always a place where we were mixed politically, right? We grew up here where my dad was a Republican, my mom was a Democrat. We never fought viciously about politics here in Michigan. We fought viciously about sports. That is what we viciously fight about. And so it was extremely important to me and meaningful for me to have Jan's support and Nancy's support and lots of other folks who made a very brave decision and considered a Democrat for the first time last cycle. Just to be sure you're at the right event, my name is Alyssa Slotkin. I'm the representative of Michigan's 8th District, which goes from right here, Rochester and Rochester Hills, through Clarkston and Lake Orion and Holly, all of Livingston County, so Brighton and Howell, and then all of Ingham County, Lansing and East Lansing. So as you can imagine, the difference between East Lansing and Rochester, there's not a ton of overlap. So it's a very unique and independently minded district, and it has been the greatest privilege of my life to represent that district because I consider myself equally independently minded. Now, welcome to the 2020 campaign. We are doing this event both socially distanced here in person and then also live for folks watching on TV so that no one has to sacrifice their health in order to participate. And it's a very different kind of campaign because we have to think about public health. But many of you, as I look out in the crowd, participated in our field campaign in 2018. And if you remember at the time, it was a pretty massive affair. We had an office right over here. We had offices across the district. We had the largest field campaign in the entire Midwest. We knocked 200,000 doors, sent 300,000 texts, and made 1 million phone calls. So obviously, that's a very different environment that we have today. And we've really worked hard to recast and reimagine a campaign for the COVID era. And there is no playbook. There's no one to turn to say, how does one do this? So I really want to thank my staff who have done an amazing job making this something that people can participate in safely. It takes a lot of logistical planning, and I hope people feel safe doing it. Now, for this area, I think it's important to realize, and another reason why it was so nice to have Jan introducing me, is that we won Rochester by 63 votes. So it was an exceptionally close race. We won Rochester Hills by a little over 700 votes. Overall in the district, I won by 13,000 votes. So enough to feel like we could do more than squeak by, but not enough to ever feel completely comfortable. And of course, the race took a pretty big turn a couple of weeks ago when Michigan State University announced that they're not coming back to campus. I represent Michigan State, and while I absolutely agree with President Stanley's decision to say no in-person classes, it definitely got my attention when 50,000 students are potentially not coming back to campus. So, and just to put that in perspective, last cycle I won by 13,000 votes, but about 7,000 of those votes were students, Michigan State students. So suddenly the race felt a little more interesting a couple of weeks ago. And because our founders established a situation where we run every 2 years, we said we can come out and talk to people in a safe and responsible way that still engages people and make what I call the value proposition to my constituents. I owe you that as your representative to say why after 2 years or 20 months, I hope to have earned your vote either for a second time or maybe for a first time. Now, when I was elected, I went to Washington to work on the issues that matter most in our district. And you can tell just by walking around, whether I'm at a farmer's market or a grocery store, or I'm out visiting a business, there's some common themes in what people talk about. Obviously, right now, people are very focused on the public health and economic fallout from COVID. That's what's on our minds. Our lives have all changed. Either we're at home and trying to school our kids, or we're still having to work, but in really different ways. And then the economic piece. It is desperately true that we are heading into fall, and a lot of our local businesses are wondering what the heck is going to happen for them as the weather turns colder. The other things that I continue to hear about, and they were the same as last cycle, the price of healthcare, the price of prescription drugs. The price of healthcare in particular, given what's going on with layoffs, given that many people lost their jobs due to COVID, and many people had insurance via their employer. But the cost of those two things for many people, including, colleagues of mine in Holly, Michigan, where I live, people are paying more in their insulin costs than they are in their mortgage. So you better believe we all pay attention to the most expensive bill that we have. So those are the things I hear about. In Livingston County in particular, I hear about PFAS and water quality. We have PFAS contamination sites there, so I hear a good deal about that. But the other theme that's very, very consistent, as Jan alluded to, is this idea of bringing some sense of civility and decency back to politics. Some sense that we can disagree without being disagreeable, that we can have those intellectual debates, real philosophical debates about the size of government, about taxation, about social programs, traditional things that make up differences between Democrats and Republicans. Those are good things to debate. And we should be able to do them without being angry, without feeling so much like we as Americans have become this sort of zero-sum game, that you're either with me or against me. And I feel that tension as well in the district. I feel it wherever I go. I feel it because my business owners are telling me about how some of our restaurants are having someone every couple of days, one of their servers end up in tears because of an engagement on a mask, right? Asking someone to please wear a mask and having that break down into a verbal fight. We're seeing that in how we're all watching this election, and I know can't wait for it to be over because of the tension in the system. And it's all exacerbated because we're at home and our lives have changed so much from COVID. But I will tell you, I still believe, just like I did last time, that human being talking to human being, personal story, expressing yourself to other people still really matters. And I knew that last cycle because of the story of my mom, right? I ended up running, even though I'm a national security person by training, I'm a former CIA officer and Pentagon official. What really got me into the race was my mom and the issue of healthcare and protections for people with pre-existing conditions. And the fact that when she was diagnosed with stage 4 ovarian cancer, she did not have health insurance. She had let it lapse. And so the same week and the same month we were dealing with her terminal diagnosis was the same week and the same month we had to fill out the paperwork for her to declare bankruptcy. That kind of personal connection motivated me to get into this race. And it's still the thing, that story is why people come up to me in the grocery store, gripping my arms and trying to tell me the story of how they can't afford their daughter's inhalers and so they couldn't send her to summer camp last year, right? Or how worried they are now due to COVID that they're a diabetic and so they have a pre-existing condition and they have a problem that could lead to them getting COVID more easily and they lost their job and they don't know how they're going to pay for their insulin. I can't tell you the number of stories, in particular from our diabetic community, of people dropping those little vials of insulin on the ground and the vials break and they use the syringe to pull up the insulin off the floor because they can't afford an extra vial at $500 each. Those are the kinds of things that people tell you when you tell your story. But I hope that in addition to the issues that I fight for and work on every single day, that it's also how I do my work that at least is part of that value proposition. So the best example I can give you of how I work was something I did yesterday here in Rochester and Rochester Hills. During COVID, in those early days when we were just being walloped in March and April, we very quickly realized we needed to do something to save our small businesses. So everyone kept telling me, the Small Business Administration, you got to get some of those emergency loans. You got to figure out how to get a loan program together so that we can get money to our businesses. So I called someone I knew who used to work at the Small Business Administration and I said, who can I talk to? And they put me in touch with a man named Rob Scott. He's from Ohio. He's the head of the Small Business Administration Great Lakes office. So he's in charge of Ohio, Michigan, Indiana, Illinois, Minnesota, and Wisconsin. And I called him up and I said, what can I do? How do I speed this along? How do I save my anchor businesses? How do I tell people that there's a light at the end of the tunnel? And he and I became absolute battle buddies. I was calling him or texting him every other day. And to his credit, he was taking my calls at very, very late hours. Because I felt the desperation coming out of our business owners, and of course, their desire to keep their employees. Our business owners are very devoted to their employees. So I would call him about this or call him about that. For some of our folks, like, the Imagine Theater folks, they've got a big theater here in the area. They've got 12 theaters across the state. They're anchors of our communities. And of course, they haven't been open. And so I called Rob and I said, could you just speak to the CEO and talk to them about restructuring debt? Could you just do me a favor and give them a sense that they've done everything they can to save their business? We had them talk to the Lansing Lugnuts, our minor league baseball team in Lansing, Michigan, that's an anchor and pays rent to Lansing, Michigan. So Rob and I became good friends. And sometime around, I want to say June or July, things weren't as desperate when we would talk. We weren't just in pure crisis mode. And so he said, he's now done Facebook Live events with me. We've done a ton amount of education with our chambers of commerce, including here in the area. And he said, I'm a pretty political Republican. And I said, oh, okay. I mean, I think I knew somewhere in the ether that he was a Republican political appointee for Donald Trump, but we had never talked about it. And he said, I want to be honest, I ran Trump's campaign in Ohio. And I said, oh, that is political. That's real political. And it didn't change for 1 minute the value that I placed in that relationship. It was critical for our businesses. So yesterday, we hosted Rob. He's on a kind of tour of all the states. We came here to Rochester and had breakfast, and then we went on a tour of businesses that got PPP loans, our signature Small Business Administration loans. And in our district, we were able to get PPP loans for over 9,000 of our businesses, and we believe it kept 118,000 people on payroll. That is 1 out of 7 people in our district. And I could not be more proud of that, despite some of the early reporting on that program. The average loan size is around $30,000 in our district. And Rob and I did joint interviews together. We met with the mayor and went on this tour together. And for me, there are plenty of people potentially in my position who would have not sought to foster that relationship and certainly not strengthen it after finding out the political differences. And I reject that ideology. I reject that idea because that idea puts the selfishness of the politician ahead of the needs of the constituents she represents. And so I hope when people are considering me for re-election, they consider not only what we've been able to achieve, but how we've gone about doing it. We have turned 9 provisions into law in our first 20 months. 6 of them are on PFAS and making sure that the military does what they are supposed to do in cleaning up this chemical that is polluting our lakes and our rivers and our drinking water. One of the other bills was on veterans apprenticeships, making sure the GI Bill can pay for veterans apprenticeship programs. The idea came from an Oakland County veteran. He literally found me at a VFW fish fry in Oxford, Michigan. He saw that I was going there. He showed up. He had this idea. He pushed. He really advocated. And I said, okay, I'm a reader. I'm a nerd. I'll read it and let me get back to you. And it was a great idea. Made perfect sense. And so in the middle of all the COVID craziness, President Trump signed into law our Veterans Apprenticeship Bill at the end of March. And it's not sexy headlines. It's not explosive fireworks, but it is nose to the ground work that impacts people's lives. And that is the job description of a member of Congress. You're supposed to be working with people, even if you don't always agree with them, to find common interests and get something done for the people you represent. So the other thing we've been able to do is, as Jan said, I joined this group called the Problem Solvers Caucus. My first couple of days that I wish my husband was here. My husband, Dave Moore, just let him pass. My husband, Dave Moore, wanted to be here. He is actually an Apache helicopter pilot by training. So he has that spooky skill where he can tell what kind of an airframe it is by hearing it from far away. So he's always he would consider that an official flyover and claim credit for it. So he is home right now with our brand new puppy that we just got this week because my old dog Dakota died after 15 years. So excuse him for not being here. But I think the Problem Solvers Caucus is this group that is literally the only truly bipartisan caucus in Washington that meets every single week. You can only join by finding a partner on the other side of the aisle, linking arms and going into the group 2 by 2 like Noah's Ark. That's the only way to get in. So it has 25 Democrats and 25 Republicans. And one of the things that I'm doing literally at 11 a.m. tomorrow is doing our now more than weekly updates to talk about how we get all sides back to the table on another COVID emergency bill. That's the kind of crew that I hang with in Washington, the people who believe in bipartisanship in their bones. And I hope that in a district like this in particular, that that's something that people appreciate. Because whether someone voted for me or not does not matter. It is my job to represent them. And I should bend over backwards, and have tried to bend over backwards to make sure that people know, even if they're not a supporter, I'm still there to listen and to work for them. Now, we have this election in a couple of weeks now. It's, I think, 58 or 57 days. I'm sure we'll be thrilled to have it over. We are in the final sprint once Labor Day is upon us. After Monday, it's like that final stretch. Unlike last cycle where we had, 250 people meeting every Saturday morning in our Rochester office, and I'd have to stand on a bucket to be heard, and we'd go out knocking doors. It is a different kind of volunteer work that we're now doing. The whole goal that we're trying to sort of keep in mind this cycle is, even if we can't be physically hugging someone or talking to someone, we can still make a personal outreach to them. So we're doing postcard writing and phone calling and texting. We're doing contactless canvassing where you knock on people's door. You don't knock, you go to their door, you stick a big sticky note with a personal note on it on the door, and then you keep on going to preserve their health. And then we're just getting super creative, right? Think about where people are still going. They're still going to farmers markets, right? They're more popular than ever. They're still going to the gas pumps. So you will see, whether you like it or not, this face on your gas pump video screen coming to a theater near you, because people are still there getting gas, right? We experimented with putting flyers on top of pizza boxes because everybody's getting carryouts. We're trying it, people. We're trying to be creative. And if you're willing to help us volunteer, if you're willing to do even just 1 2-hour shift, even if it's something you've never done, I would argue this is the election to do it for. This is the election where people will ask you, your grandchildren will ask you, what did you do in 2020? When the country felt divided, where we went through a dark moment. And I don't believe for 1 minute this represents the best of us. I don't believe for 1 minute that this is a permanent situation. I believe that the good and decent people who live in the middle are silent but serious, and will not let our country become a divisive, angry place that we want to shield our children from. I refuse to believe that. I love this country and what it can do. I've seen it a million different ways since I became elected. For every nasty thing I see 10 amazing things. And nowhere, and I'll leave on this story, nowhere more than what this community and this area did during COVID when we didn't have personal protective equipment for our healthcare workers. I was doing almost daily phone calls with Ascension and our other hospitals. We have 5 hospitals in the district. And we started to get these sobbing phone calls on our phone lines every hour, every day, nurses and doctors telling us how they were sharing a gown, they were rationing masks, they didn't have gloves, they didn't have, reagent and ways to test people. And for a good 6 weeks, I just turned into a dealer of personal protective equipment. I tell people I set up a booth in the Star Wars cantina, and every weird monster came by and was like, hey, I got a guy who knows a guy who can get you masks in China, because that's where it all is. It's all in China. And so I spent 6 weeks
haggling with companies, representatives I had never really met in any other context, with Chinese middlemen in the middle of the night in line at a rural Chinese factory, waiting with like their deli ticket to try and get to the front of the line to put in an order for masks, a 78-cent mask. And in the end, we scrapped together a lot of ingenuity and a lot of goodwill from the business community to bring in thousands and thousands of masks into our district. But the way we had to do it was a complete failure of our supply chains. We ended up getting masks for Ascension and a few other hospitals because the folks who represent, does anyone know the Chinese restaurant Panda Express? You know those guys? Wouldn't recommend eating there every single day. It's not the healthiest food. But God bless them, the heads of Panda Express called our office and said, if you can prove that your hospitals are within 10 miles of a Panda Express, we'll get you masks. And so guess what our team did? They went to the map. They Googled, and 3 out of 5 of our hospitals, including Ascension, are within 10 miles of a Panda Express. And that's how we got some of our masks. That's bonkers. That's bonkers. And it is like created in me this drive on the issue of our supply chains, on medical supplies, pharmaceuticals, and then of course food. Those supply chains have a national security importance. If you can't get in a mask to keep your nurses safe in a global pandemic, that's a threat to your country. That's a threat to your community. So we have a big piece of actually a package of legislation that should be coming up here in the next couple of weeks, a Made in America medical supply chain bill that allows us to incentivize American companies, including some right here, generics companies right here in Rochester, to be able to actually bulk up their production of American medical supplies, of American pharmaceuticals. This is my passion now, because it brings together the national security work of my prior life and the manufacturing base that we have better than anywhere else in the world. American companies jumped into the fray, Michigan companies jumped into the fray to produce and retool to get our community what they needed. And it was an incredibly proud moment to me to go. I've now gotten a chance to go to these companies, you know, in Oxford, where they make NHL hockey equipment, and they just retooled to make gowns. I mean, it's amazing. Tier 1 and Tier 2 auto suppliers who are making face shields. This is what American ingenuity can do. This is what Americans can do, and this is what this community can do. And it is what I choose to focus on rather than wallowing in the division and the hate. I thank you for your time. I thank you for being engaged in the community and for caring about what happens here. And I thank you for your support. All right. So let's take some questions. I know we have folks watching online, and Maggie's going to tell us some of the questions that are coming in online. We encourage those. But yes, sir. Oh, sorry, I was speaking to the man in front of you. Give him 1 second. Sure. Got it. So I'm going to repeat the question just for the folks who are watching online. So the first question was about would I initiate or sign on to legislation that would require some truth in advertising laws for political ads. And then the second question was about the Electoral College and would I support overturning, frankly, not overturning, but making an amendment to the US Constitution to get rid of the Electoral College. So on the first question, one of the first major bills that we passed when I first became a member of Congress was called HR 1. And it was an attempt to deal with some of the money issues, the money problems that exist in our electoral system. Particularly that a lot of those ads, particularly like the bad ones, the ones that are like, you know, so-and-so, she did this. I mean, the ones that sort of fit the stereotype are often paid for by dark money super PACs that you literally don't know who paid for them. You don't know where they come from. You have no transparency on who's even putting that out into the ether. But I would absolutely support legislation that would require a sort of fact-based standard for political ads. Because as someone who was the receiver of $14 million of attack ads last cycle, my poor dad couldn't even turn on the TV. He was so mad. He's like, I can't watch my shows. I have tried. And certainly in any ad that I make with my own dollars, you're never going to see lies, attacks, just blatant libel. I mean, for me, talk about what I want to do for people, my affirmative case for people, not tearing down and just spending all my time on the other guy. But absolutely, I want to join with that piece of legislation, though. Another piece that I initiated in my first term that hasn't gone anywhere in the Senate, foreigners should not be able to buy political ads for or against any candidate in any American election, period. And while we have some rules around that for TV, we have some rules around that for TV that actually go back to the Cold War from the sort of 60s and 70s. We have zero laws on that when it comes to social media. So that's why you saw a lot in 2016, these sort of social media targeted ads that were for a candidate against another candidate that were paid for by foreign governments. So yes to your piece, but let's add on the foreign piece. On the Electoral College, so lots of debate and discussion about this. Again, I'm a pragmatist, and my first term in Congress has demonstrated that we need to take a crawl, walk, run approach when it comes to getting things done, because people are in their corners a bit. A constitutional amendment is a very high bar. That's what it will take in order to get rid of the Electoral College. That's a very high bar. And while I'm always willing to have the conversation, it hasn't been a place where I've been spending a lot of time because I gotta get something done. I gotta put some points on the board. And that one, while it kind of sounds like something interesting that I'd be willing to talk about, the practicality of getting it done is just hard for me to cling on to. Okay, yes, sorry. Go ahead. Yes, you. One time. We vote once, please. Too soon, dude. Too soon. Once. Mm-hmm. I think for me, and we've talked about this many times, but I have not supported Medicare for all. And until and unless someone can show me a way to financially afford it, that really clearly lays out the trade-offs, that makes explicit how we're going to pay for it, it is not something that I can sign on to. And that is because it's my responsibility to be fiscally responsible. And we can disagree about that and priorities around how we spend our money. There's a legitimate debate there. But I will just tell you personally, it's similar to other things that I've been asked to sign on to. I can't sign on to something that doesn't have clear, provable math. And I'm willing to entertain on any issue, a debate and a discussion and serious work. But there's been a number of things over the last couple of years that have been presented to me, and let's have a conversation about that issue, but let's do it based in facts. And for me, the spirit of the issue is different from the actual practicality of the issue. So I'm willing to have a follow-on conversation always, but I gotta see the math. You gotta show me the math. Okay, what else? Let's take a question. We have something, Maggie, from our online feed.
What can we do to get broadband to areas?
Sure, I'll repeat the question because the mic wasn't working that I could hear, unless someone tells, where's it working, Nancy? No, it wasn't working, okay. So the question was, what can we do to get broadband everywhere where we need it? So I really think that COVID has basically taken all the inequalities and differences between us and shined a huge spotlight on them. So one of the things that was just a difference before COVID was who had access to broadband, what kind of bandwidth we had access to, right? And then whether we had a device to get us onto that broadband. And what we found during COVID, when we all had to react and our kids started learning from home and we started working from home, was some people don't have any of the three of those things. Lots of kids in Holly, in Heartland, in Fowlerville had to be given a device from school because they had no device. In those same communities, 30% of the kids in some of those communities don't have any access to cell phone signal. So it wasn't even a question of a device. They couldn't get on broadband. They couldn't get on the internet. You know what those kids are doing right now during school? If they have decided to take the in-home option, then they drive every single day to their school parking lot, their library parking lot. They go to the hotspot near them. They have a data stick, they download the lessons, then they go back home and put it on their computer and do their learning at home, not live. Does that sound fair? And I know that the schooling options have been a real issue of debate across our state, but it is clear to me after COVID that broadband needs to be thought of like a utility. You would never think to buy a home that didn't have telephone service or water service or gas service. And I think the same thing is true now on broadband. But the difference is when we went and decided that all of rural America should have electricity, we did, literally, it's called the rural electrification process. It was something where we made a decision as a government to go out and make sure that every community had access to electricity. We need a program that's modeled off of the same thing, but that acknowledges right now it's not the government that's providing your broadband. It's a company, right? Almost all of you, you're going to have AT&T or whoever you get it from. So public-private partnerships across the entire country for universal broadband. That's something the House put in our bill at the end of May. It was called the HEROES Act. It is a source of negotiation once they restart in Washington on the next COVID bill. But I am a firm believer, particularly after this crisis, that broadband needs to be universally available here in the United States. What else? Yes, sir, in the go green. Mm-hmm. Got it. And the question was this gentleman here who roots for the right school has property in Canada and hasn't been able to go there. You all know that the border has been closed with the exception of healthcare workers that maybe are Canadian and come across and work in our healthcare facilities, and then some special dispensation if there's a health issue, a family sort of in dire straits health-wise. There's been a few cases we've been able to help work. So a couple of things. We have a constituent services team at my office on the congressional side. We have an office in Rochester Hills and an office in Lansing, and all they do is work on issues with the federal government. So you better believe we've had a ton of people in exactly your same situation. They've got a cabin, they've got family there, they've got land, they've got commerce, business interests, the whole thing. And then on top, that's the sort of person-to-person stuff, but then between Windsor, the tunnel, the bridge, and up north in Sarnia, we are the busiest and most lucrative land crossing in the United States. So you can imagine the companies, our governor, everybody wants that border open, right? Everybody wants it open. We've been able to help and engage the State Department on getting a few of these sort of, not amnesty, but kind of willingness to be cooperative when you've got someone, for instance, with a terminal illness. We've been able to get some dispensation to let them go over to the Canadian side, but we have not yet gotten permission for anyone to go over to enjoy their cabin, their second property. And while it's an interesting one to have the COVID test and sort of prove that is there a way to sort of show that you deserve to be able to go over there? This is literally being handled at the sort of President of the United States, Prime Minister of Canada level. And unfortunately, we here in Michigan, we did an amazing job of bringing down our numbers, but they're still ticking slowly up. And so there is going to be, in my experience, reluctance by the Canadians to let their side of the border open. I think, frankly, if it were up to us, we would have it open, but it's been their choice on keeping it closed. So I encourage you, if there's special circumstances, please grab one of my team. They'll give you their card, we can talk about it. But we've been hearing these cases, of course, all summer, and we have not been successful lobbying the Canadian government. I just bummed him out, seriously. So, okay, who else? Who else? Maggie, anything else from online?
Sure. Will the post offices be open and ready in time for the election?
So the post office is open, and I'm sure, I got my mail today, and I think the situation is this. We have had some cuts to the budget based on the fact that the Postal Service kind of perennially has a problem maintaining solvency. And that goes back to 2006 when a vote was taken in Congress, I think it was Christmas Eve in 2006, kind of in the dead of night, that said that the post office has to prepay its pensions and health care for its workers. I mean, up to 30 years in the future. So think of any business or any organization you're a part of. If you had to prepay your pensions, there's no way that you could maintain solvency. So we have this perennial problem with the post office, and the Postmaster General decided to make some cuts and started. The biggest thing that seemed to affect the timing of our mail was this real clampdown on overtime, on paying postal workers overtime. And by me spending a lot of time now with our postal workers, our Postmaster General, visiting a big processing facility in Lansing, it appears to me that because the Postal Service is a founding institution, our first Postmaster General, looking at the kids, anyone know who our first American Postmaster General was? Benjamin Franklin, thank you. Benjamin Franklin was our first Postmaster General. The post office understands how desperately people need their mail, and so if they came back after a run and there was a big bunch of mail that needed to be sorted, they did an hour of overtime collectively and sorted it. And then they went home. When they clamped down on overtime, we of course saw mail piling up, and where we saw it most profoundly was on packages. We had some packages that arrived on time, like from my in-laws, they sent me mangoes from Florida, and then we had some packages that took 3 weeks. And where we started hearing from constituents really early was from people who rely on those packages for their prescription drugs. Particularly again, diabetics who get their insulin cheaper from places like Canada, and who get their drugs mailed to them, but also their glucose strips and their injectors and all of these things. And so people started to stress out, and it disproportionately impacted our veterans. If you are on VA insurance, 70% of people on VA insurance get their prescriptions via the mail. So that's what we started hearing. And then we know we had the stories of boxes being removed, drop boxes being removed, and things being scaled back. I will tell you the system did work because people really spoke out. The average person really did not like their mail being mucked with. In some rural communities, it's the only provider. You know, UPS isn't coming down some of these dirt roads in our community. And so the Postmaster General in August was brought in front of the House and the Senate, and he agreed to halt some of the pullbacks of boxes and service, any closure of offices. So that was, to me, a real positive example of engagement by Americans changes policy. That being said, we are still seeing some delays in some areas, not all. And of course, we all know that lots of people are going to be voting absentee in our election in November. Those ballots will start to go out really soon. And so what we are encouraging people to do is if you still have your ballot on October 20th and you want to make 100% sure it gets in, then drop it off outside your clerk's office. They have a box specifically for this. And then if you wait until election day and you haven't turned it in, just drive by your polling place. At this point, I think every one of our polling places has a drop box. Most cases, you don't even have to get out of the car. Just for your health, and just make sure it's in. And then if you mail it in and you want to be crystal clear that it's in, everyone here can go to the Secretary of State's website, put in your license number. It'll pull up when you got mailed your ballot and when it was received back. So you have comfort knowing that it is in and it is prepared to be counted on election day. And let me just say, because I think in this day and age, we just need to say it, I'm a firm believer in all of the legal ways to vote, right? Absentee voting is a legal, respectable way to vote. And we shouldn't be sowing doubt into absentee voting, mail-in voting. It's a completely legal option that we here in Michigan voted for in Proposition 3 back in 2018. So I'm gonna stop there. Thank you for your time. Thank you for coming out. I'm gonna come around the side over here, over by Gordon. If folks wanna say hi, they're gonna keep us socially distanced and responsible because he knows that without that, I'm not always so responsible. I'm a hugger, so it's really a hard time for me, people. And thank you for your attention and your time, okay? Have a great day, guys.